Is that working? I'm not sure if that's doing what it's. Yes.
It's starting recording. Yeah. Okay. So should I start?
Yes, please.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me, Professor Abdin. Thank you for inviting me as a speaker in this wonderful speaker series, and I'm much honored. The topic today I would like to discuss in this talk is about a virtuous audience. And the more specific question I hope to address in this talk is what does a virtuous audience look like? It's kind of a work I have collaborated with my student, Miss Yidan Wang, and I think she is also here online with us. And Yidan, would you like to say hello to everyone first?
Yes, thank you very much. I'm Yiran Wang. I'm a PhD student and I study in Sun Yat-sen University. My interest is virtual augmentation theory, and Professor Yin Xie is my supervisor. And in 2023, I visited Florida for 1 year, and Professor Andrew Aberdeen supervised me. And at that time, I had great interest on the virtuous audience, and Andrew Aberdeen promoted me a lot. I really should say thank you to Andrew. And I'm also very thankful to Professor Daniel Cohen, even though he's not there. I had a talk with him about my interest on virtuous audience, and then we had another paper together, and also had a presentation on OSA last year. And I should also say thank you to Professor Yin Xie. He made great contributions to this paper and helped me to make my idea clear. And I also learned a lot while collaborating with him. Thank you.
Okay. I think you should say hello, not say thank you in the very beginning. Anyway, Ida has visited Professor Aberdeen for a whole year and came back with this topic of a virtuous audience. So then we start to work on this, and it really cost me quite a lot of time working on this. So, it's kind of all your fault, you know, Professor Aberdeen. Okay, just a joke. So let me get started. And today I will do all the presentation, and Ethan might join us in later discussions. So let me first give a very brief introduction about the topic I'm going to discuss today. It's the virtuous audience. And I think many of you who are interested in those kind of speaker theory on the ethics of argumentation might already know that this is kind of a topic that is emerged in a recent approach to the argumentation studies. It is called the virtual argumentation theory. It has been initiated and also developed by scholars like Daniel Cohen and Andrew Aberdeen and many others for the last 2 decades. And for almost all those virtual argumentation theorists, they kind of endorsed a very basic view that a good argumentation is not a propositional product that can meet some logical or rhetorical or dialectical standards. Rather, a good argument is kind of one that has been conducted virtuously by the agent in the argument. So in order to realize such an idea, the virtual argumentation theories has made many efforts to explore what kind of virtues that are needed for the agent in argumentation to act virtuously. And the first solution, I think, comes from Daniel Cohen's paper 20 years ago, published 20 years ago. In that paper, Cohen has proposed a notion of ideal arguer, which is simply characterized by four willingness. That is willingness to engage in argumentation and willingness to listen to others and to modify one's own position and to question the obvious. And taking those four willingness as some general categories, and Professor Andrew Aberdeen has further developed a list of virtues. It's like this, showing in this slide, in which you can find there are more than 10 virtue items for the arguer, such as the intellectual courage and the common sense, or autonomy, or diligence, or insight into the problems or theories, something like that. And a more recent account of the virtues for the arguer has been developed in a paper published by Kate Stevens in 2016. In that paper, Stevens has gone even further to argue that there are actually 4 different roles for the arguer to play, and there are also 2 different sets of virtues for the arguer to employ. So in the end, Stevens continued to argue that the arguer might also need to use some practical wisdom to decide which virtues should guide her in which argumentative situation. From this very brief review, we can find that though the virtue argumentation theories has taken much effort in exploring the virtues for the agency argumentation, but they have largely focused on just one participant in the argumentation, that is the arguer. So just as is criticized by Artamimi, the virtues developed by them relate only to the virtuous arguer, and they are actually ignoring the role of the audience. We, of course, share this kind of observation because even for those virtue argumentation theories, they have also endorsed the view that a fully satisfying argument will need to take into account all its participants. So all its participant means not only the arguer, but many other participants like the opponents or the third-party interlocutors as well. So in this talk and in this study, we hope to shift the focus from the virtuous arguer to the audience to address the question like, what does a virtuous audience look like? So that is a very brief explanation of where did we get this kind of a research question. But to start, we also have to stress that this is not really a brand new topic in the study of argumentation theory. The issue of virtuous audience has already been touched upon by many others even before the development of virtue argumentation theory. For example, in 1980s, Tony Blair and Ralph Johnson has published a paper titled Argumentation as Dialectical, in which they have already developed a notion of modal interlocutor, which is featured by certain traits of reasonableness, such as being knowledgeable, reflective, and dialectically astute. And also, for those who are familiar with the theory of the new rhetoric, you might know that Perlman has also developed the notion of universal audience, which is not simply consisted of all the human beings, but all those who are competent and reasonable. And even in the pragma-dialectical approach to argumentation, which focuses primarily on the procedures and the rules in argumentation, it has also been contended that all the discussants in the argumentation will also need to meet some second-order condition. That means having some desired internal states or dispositions that would affect their ability to follow the rules. So those discussions can all be understood to a great extent as some discussion about the character traits of the agent in argumentation, especially it can be applied to the audience in the argumentation. So so that is why we think that the issue of the virtuous audience is not a new topic, but has already been touched upon before. However, the brief review can also indicate two things for us. The first is that we can see from those discussions that an audience with certain desirable character traits is always recognized and actually commonly welcomed in all those different approaches to argumentation. For example, Tony Blair and Ralph Johnson, they represent the logical, informal logical approach, and the new rhetoric is an example of the rhetorical approach to argumentation, and the pragma dialectics means the dialectical approach. So a virtuous audience is actually commonly welcomed in all those different approaches to argumentation. But the second thing it is indicated is that even though they have touched upon this issue, but the topic of virtuous audience have always been only mentioned very briefly, lacking of any in-depth discussions. A more systematic treatment of the virtuous audience can be found in Al-Tamimi's book, which is published in 2017. Al-Tamimi is one of the virtue argumentation theorists. And in that book, she has developed a theory of narrative argument. And in that theory, he has paid much attention to discuss the issue of the virtuous audience, because according to her, it is the audience that is judging the argument. Therefore, the audience will need to have a certain set of virtues in order to reject the bad narratives in the case of storytelling. So endorsing that kind of a position, Al-Tamimi has set herself to exploring and explaining the relevant virtues that an audience need to cultivate in order to be able to reject those dangerous narratives. So here is what she has achieved in exploring all those virtues for the audience. We can see that for the first, she has borrowed many virtue items from Abden's list, because she thinks most of the virtues identified by Abden can be also applied to the audience. So she has borrowed all those items under the category of the willingness to engage in argumentation and to listen to others and to question the obvious. And beside that, she has also added two new items, which are called fair intention and the critical trust. The former means the audience need to have an intention to take the other person seriously and not to think of them as insane. And the latter means that the audience might need to look for cues of coherence or intelligibility or the credibility in the teller. However, if we try to read Al-Tamimi's book very carefully, we can also find that her discussion about the virtuous audience has actually focused primarily on the role of audience in the context of evaluating the narrative arguments. As she has clarified herself, what she is interested in identifying is a certain set of virtues that could aid an audience in differentiating between acceptable and unacceptable arguments, and to avoid the acceptance of dangerous stories. So it is because of this, we don't think Al-Tamimi has offered us a fully satisfactory account of virtuous audience, because we think such kind of understanding, such a focus on the role of audience in the context of evaluation is kind of a narrow conception of audience. And it is kind of natural to think that an audience can do more than just evaluating. So based on that thinking, we hope to propose to understand audience from a more general perspective. That means an audience can participate in the argumentation, playing some other possible roles. But what are those other possible roles? If we take this kind of a more general view in understanding audience, and to answer that question, we think we need to first turn to another question, which is how could the audience contribute to our argumentation that she's participating? However, if we turn to that question and we start to reflect on that question, we can find that there are actually two different ways of answering that question in the virtual argumentation literature. And as far as we read those works of the virtual argumentation theories, we think those two different ways are actually exemplified respectively in the works of Cohen and that of Artemimi. So let's first take a look at the work of Daniel Cohen. For Daniel Cohen, he tends to treat everyone in argumentation as a fully equal participant. So according to him, the arguer and the opponents and the third-party interlocutors and all those involved in argumentation, they are all part of the cast of characters in an argument, and they all have the same standing to make a judgment as to the satisfactoriness of the argument. So based on this thinking, Daniel Cohen has offered a suggestion that we need to expand the category of arguer to include everyone who is relevant for the judgment that the argument is or is not fully satisfying. And this kind of suggestion, as far as we understand it, is kind of a leading to a way of understanding audience that is subsuming it into a unified category of arguer. And such kind of a subsuming, we think, would simply lead to a conclusion that the audience actually has no distinctiveness in her contributing to the argumentation. And also, the audience would have no particular roles in argumentation. And this conclusion can be further confirmed if we have a look at the wide arrow of arguer roles proposed by Cohen in 2013. This is kind of an arrow of arguer rules. This arrow of arguer rules is developed by Cohen to describe all those different characters involved in argumentation. So here we can see there are the proponents and opponents, there are third-party interlocutors, and there are also judges and juries, and there are interested spectators, and there are even any party with interest in the outcome. But you can see there are no audience. There's no roles for the audience. So the audience just disappears in this wide arrow of the arguer roles. And unlike Cohen's dismissing the audience, I think if we read Artemimi's work, we can find that she is just going to exactly the opposite direction. That is to overstress the audience. And according to her theory, that the audience must have played a very, very crucial role in argumentation, because she believes that every arguer must adapt her argument to the audience. So that means the audience is actually very much involved in both the construction and also the outcome of the argument. And also she also contends that it is the audience that is the measure of the argument. That means the quality of the argument will be eventually dependent on the quality of the audience. And also based on the fact that the arguer will also be positioned as an audience in a dialogical exchange. So Tamimi went further to claim that the audience essentially includes both the arguer and the interlocutor. So on that basis, we have seen that in her work, Tamimi has offered a suggestion that is contrary to Daniel Cohen. That is, she wants to expand the audience to include the arguer. And as she has clarified, the audience is not a remote or distant or detached entity that only listens or receives the argument from the arguer. And also the audience will never be passive or merely a recipient of the argument. So to quote her words, what this means is that the notion of the audience will in fact include the arguer. So we don't follow those two approach. We think both of them are kind of a little radical in understanding the role of the audience. For Daniel Cohen, the audience is not that important, so it can disappear, and it can be included in the notion of the arguer. But for Tamimi, the audience is too important, so it can include the arguer. We think both these reviews are a little radical, so we disagree with them. And we think it is too radical that leads to a failure to give a balanced understanding about the arguer and audience relationship in argumentation. What we hope to propose is that we should bring this discussion back to a kind of a moderate view to understand the role of audience. To be more specific, we hope to insist that the arguer and the audience are truly two different roles, even though a person can shift between those two roles at different times, but we don't think anyone can take them both at the same time. So from that, we hope to claim that neither of those roles could really include the other. So with that said, we hope to bring this discussion back to a moderate perspective. That is a moderate way to conceive the role of audience. To explain it in more details, I would like to add that what this moderate way to conceive the role of audience means. We means that in such a moderate view, we need to highlight an asymmetry between the arguer and the audience. That is, we want to contain that the role of the audience is indeed dependent on that of the arguer. So we think the audience should be understood more generally as initially someone who is addressed by the arguer with her arguments. And we also believe that it is because of this passivity that can first and foremost define the audience and distinguish it from the role of the arguer. So if we try to take this moderate way to conceive, to understand audience, then how could that audience participate in and contribute to the argumentation? So this brings us back to the original question we were trying to answer. So how could she participate and contribute to argumentation? Our answer is that if an audience is understood simply as someone initially addressed by the arguer with his arguments, then the audience would participate and contribute to the argumentation by first listening to the arguer to understand his words, and then to examine what she has heard and to give responses to the arguer and to interact with him, to exchange ideas. And after that, she will learn something from the interaction with the arguer and improve herself. So this is our understanding of the participation and the contribution of the audience in this kind of a moderate way, this kind of moderate view. So if that is correct, then what does a virtuous audience look like if we really take this particular understanding of the participation and contribution of the audience? Our answer, I think, would be not so hard to find because it's kind of obvious that a virtuous audience, if her participation and contribution is understood by listening, responding, and improving. So a virtuous audience would be just a combination of a virtuous listener who can understand well the arguer, and also a virtuous examiner who can respond appropriately to his argument, and then a virtuous learner who can update her own knowledge timely. And so let me explain them in more details one by one. For the first, we think a virtuous audience would be a virtuous listener, which means she would be a person possessing and acting from a certain set of virtues that could make her a good listener. So what are those kind of virtues that can make someone a good listener? Rice and Bubbles once published a paper in 2010 in which they have indicated that good listening will require virtues. And their conclusion is that it requires virtues like patience, tolerance, and humility, and also various intellectual virtues. But they didn't go any further to explore what are those other various intellectual virtues. And in another paper co-authored by Davis and Golden and published in 2021, they have described many different ways of adversarial listening in argumentation, but they didn't discuss them by means of virtues. So we think there remains to be much to be said about the virtues for a good listener. So in our view, we think that a virtuous listener will first need to listen well to the speaker in order to understand his words. So in order to do that, we think the virtuous listener will first need to be willing to give the speaker a chance to speak. So that means the virtue of respect for others is actually needed. And then I think a virtuous listener would allow the speaker to finish his words. Otherwise, the speaker cannot fully express himself. So that will simply means the virtue of patience and tolerance will also be involved. And after that, we think a virtuous listener will also need to have some virtue of attentiveness in order to give attention to the speaker's words. This is particularly necessary if the speaker's words is not so easy to follow. I think it's just like in today's lecture. I am not a native English speaker, so you might need to be more attentive than usual in order to follow what I'm saying here. And after the listening to the speaker, and I think a virtuous listener would also need to interpret what she heard in order to comprehend the speaker's thought. So in order to do that, we think the virtuous listener will also need to be astute and discriminating in order to tell between what is important and what is not, and also need to be alert to all those possible relevant information for his interpretation. And also she would be open-minded in order to give a charitable interpretation and to achieve a faithful understanding from the speaker's own perspective. And meanwhile, I think she would also need to have a willingness to care about the speaker and to share his thinking or feelings. So that means she will need to have the virtue of empathy. I think this is particularly important when the speaker's thinking is so different from the listener's own thinking. So this is what we have identified for a virtuous listener. And after an active listening, I think a virtuous audience would become a virtuous examiner, which means she will first need to make a fair judgment about what she has heard. It's kind of a judgment about the value of the speaker's thoughts as expressed in his words. And it goes without saying that such kind of a judgment has to be made by referring back to the audience's own understanding of the issue. So in order to be able to make a fair judgment, I think it's easy to see that the audience will need to be fair-minded in order to neutralize the impact of her own prejudices. And also, he will need to be humble in order to assess her own epistemic competence, and also to avoid distortion or underestimation of the speaker's thoughts. Besides, we also think the virtuous examiner will need some sense of intellectual carefulness in order to have a sensitivity to find the strengths and the weakness when evaluating the speaker's words. And after making a critical judgment, and a virtuous audience will then try to give responses to the speaker and to engage with him for further exchange of ideas. For example, she may offer criticisms, comments, or suggestions for the arguer to further develop or revise his own ideas. And she may also just express his own thinking about the issue or his own idea of the topic for the arguer to further take into consideration. It's just something like that. So in that way, we think a virtuous audience will need to first have this kind of a virtue of courtesy in order to first respond in a quite civil and polite manner. And also in order to promote such kind of exchange of ideas, a virtuous audience will also need to be intellectually curious and also have some sense of intellectual thoroughness in order to be equipped with a disposition to question, to wonder, and to probe further into the issue, and also a strong desire to explore further about the topic and to know more about the topic or to know more about the arguer's own thinking. And after this kind of active listening and interacting with the arguer, I think a virtuous audience will then become a virtuous learner who may have already learned something in this interaction. For example, she may have found that his own ideas is actually wrong, so he might need to change his own mind, or maybe she could find that the arguer's argument is kind of strong, so now she may know better about the issue or the topic, or she may just know better about the arguer, so she may know how to continue this kind of argumentation with him or something like that. So in a way, in other words, she may have learned something, then she can improve herself in her belief system or in her knowledge about the topic or about the arguer. However, such kind of improvement, as far as we understand, will not happen by itself, because it will require some kind of self-motivation to improve. So in that case, we think being a virtuous learner, a virtuous audience will need to have the virtue of intellectual honesty in order to be truthful to herself and in order to sincerely recognize the value of the speaker's views. And she will also need to be intellectually courageous in order to be brave enough to admit her own ignorance, and also to overcome the fear or embarrassment of her own failure to understand the issue, and so on. And on the other hand, we also think a virtuous learner would also need to have the virtue of the intellectual integrity in order to just stick to their own firm convictions. So this is actually a very brief explanation of those what we have understood about the virtuous audience. And to summarize, we illustrate our final answer to this question with this table. What does a virtuous audience look like? Our final answer is that a virtuous audience would have possessed this kind of a relevant virtues, and they will participate and contribute to argumentation by listening, responding, and self-improving. But we need to add immediately that this kind of a final answer we have offered should not be understood as an exhaustive list for the audience virtues, because as far as we understand it, there would be some more virtues that can be important to the audience in a more general sense. For example, the virtues like faith in reason or responsibility or sincerity could be relevant to all those agents who is participant in argumentation, and they will also be relevant throughout all the stages of argumentation. So that simply means they would also be relevant to the audience but in a quite general way. And on the other hand, we also think that there could also be some more particular virtues that are relevant to the audience with more specific purposes. The example we have in mind is taken from Ralph Johnson's 2000 book, Manifest Rationality. In that work, Ralph has made a distinction between argument evaluation and argument criticism. Based on that distinction, Ralph Johnson has specified two different tasks for the audience. One of them is called a judge, and another is called a coach. The difference between them would be that a judge will only evaluate the arguer's argument for her own sake. That is to improve her own knowledge or to make his own decision. But a coach is different. A coach will always try to offer constructive feedbacks to the arguer for the arguer's benefits. So if we take into account those two different tasks for the audience, we might say that for an audience to fulfill the task of a coach, she may also need some virtue of generosity or even some virtue of altruism. But if she's only fulfilling the task of a judge, those two virtues might not be really relevant. So in the end, we hope to just contend that the virtue we have identified only consists of a basic list that can be extended if we further consider the different contexts or the different purposes of the argumentation or the different purposes of the audience participating in the argumentation. However, even though we admit that it's only a tentative and basic list, we still think it's kind of a useful list because we believe it has already included almost all those core virtues for the audience. And if we take it as a framework, then we can easily analyze many different ways an audience can behave badly in argumentation. So in the last part of my talk, I hope to show this, but also in a very brief way. For the first, the issue of the badly behaved audiences has also been touched upon by several other scholars. For example, Daniel Cohen and Tony Blair, and also the paper we have already mentioned, that is Davis and Golden, 2021. But they have mainly focused on describing different types of the bad audiences. They didn't try to explain them from the virtue perspective. But we think if we take our list seriously, we have a framework in order to explain them by means of the audience virtues we have identified. What do we mean by this? Here we want to just offer some illustrations. The first example is taken from Tony Blair in a paper published in 2011. Tony Blair has identified a group of badly behaved audiences, which he termed the interrupter. That is someone who breaks in on speakers before they have had a chance to complete their contribution, or who speaks out of terms. So this kind of a bad audience, we think it's easy to see that it can be explained by lack of the virtue of patience and tolerance. And the second group identified by Tony Blair is called the repeater. That is someone who is self-absorbed and doesn't follow the argumentation or general discussion or ignores it, and then jumps in with an argument that has already been given or responded to. And we think it can be explained for the most part by a lack of the virtue of attentiveness. And here are two other groups identified by Davis and Golden in their 2021 paper. They have actually did very nice work in exploring a variety of different ways of bad listening in argumentation. And they have gave them a lot of very interesting names. So here we only want to illustrate those two groups. The first is termed by them the soliloquist, who simply listen for some conversational cue, marking an entry point for further monologuing. And the second, they call them the gunslingers, who only listen selectively to a speaker's point, seeking some claim that is disagreeable or otherwise susceptible to objection or rebuttal. Those two interesting groups of bad audiences, we think, can be explained by a lack of the virtue of open-mindedness and humility, and also a lack of the virtue of empathy. And the last example is taken from Daniel Cohen. He has identified a group of bad audience, which he named, he had gave the name of an eager believer, who is also a very interesting group who combines a healthy earnestness with an uncritical gullibility, hence would adopt whatever position he has most recently heard. So this kind of a group, I think they act badly because of a lack of intellectual integrity. So here is a summary of all those kind of badly behaved audiences we have tried to analyze by means of the audience virtues in our list. And many of them were identified and named by the scholars we have mentioned, Daniel Cohen and Tony Blair and Davis and Golden. And we have tried to analyze all of them by means of the audience virtues. But here we won't go any further to explain them one by one, because we think the above 4 illustrations is already enough or sufficient to show what we have done. Okay, so finally, let me conclude by stressing some main points we have reached in this talk. The first is that if virtue argumentation theories are correct in saying that a good argumentation is one that has been conducted virtuously, then we think it must be a collaboration between the virtuous arguer and also the virtuous audience. And for the second, we contend that in its most general sense, the audience in argumentation should be understood as someone who is addressed by the arguer with her argument. So it cannot be included by the notion of arguer, and it also cannot include the notion of the arguer. And we also propose to understand her participation and the contribution to the argumentation basically by listening, responding, and self-improving. And given that the virtuous audience is indeed a person of a certain set of virtues, we have tried to identify what kind of virtues are relevant for the audience. And we also try to show that without the cultivation of those virtues, an audience can simply become a bad audience, acting badly in different ways to impede the development of argumentation. So as my final concluding remark, I would like to say that the virtuous audience is exactly someone it is good to argue with, but it is also someone whom it is not so easy to come across. And I suspect that maybe in today's talk, I have already been lucky enough to meet one of them. Okay, that's all about my talk, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That was wonderful. So let me see if I can switch off the recording.